Right, Aaron Bastani and Peter Hitchens are still here with me. So, the Foreign Secretary was speaking just a little while ago to confirm £600 million of additional support for Ukraine. Have a listen.
And today I can confirm more than 600 million worth of support for Ukraine, including 242 million this financial year for immediate humanitarian, energy and stabilisation needs, as well as support for reform, recovery and reconstruction.
And seriously, on a very serious issue, the US and the UK are currently deciding whether to allow Ukraine to launch long-range missiles into Russia. The Kremlin have said that any decision to do so would trigger a response. So, Peter, there still remains, in my opinion, no clear strategic off-ramp at the moment for this conflict. What are Blinken, Biden, Lammy, etc., what are they playing at here?
Well, I don't know, and I've never been able to get anyone to answer the simple question, what are the strategic interests of the United Kingdom in pursuing its involvement in a proxy war between the United States and Russia on the soil of Ukraine? And nobody can answer it for me.
Well,
I absolutely don't. There is an American foreign policy faction which wants the United States to be indirectly at war with Russia pretty much permanently. That's their affair. If people in the United States want to maintain a government which wants to do it, that's also their affair. But I cannot, for the life of me, see why we should be doing this, nor can I see how we can afford it. Last Friday, the Daily Mail published an absolutely astonishing story, which ought to have been more widely followed, that the entire fleet of British nuclear attack submarines, that's not the nuclear missile submarines, the Trident ones, but the ones which are actually part of the fleet, are now in dock. The Navy doesn't operate, and many of our surface ships are also permanently in dock. They don't move. They're in permanent refit, or just nothing happens to them, or they're broken down. We don't actually have, to all intents and purposes, a navy. Therefore, our own defence of our own home islands has been neglected to the point where it will take many years and a lot of money and a great deal of recruiting and training to get it back into a state where we will have a properly defended coastline. And at the same time, we're spending enormous amounts of money promoting and continuing a war in which we have no national interest. Now, there is a fascinating discussion to be had about this and about the nature of British foreign policy and why we are always, over and over again, the fifth wheel in the American car. But it is not had, and it is actually quite astonishing that if you try to even question this, you're immediately accused of treachery, of working for the Russians, of being... Someone will no doubt be even now tapping away on Twitter or on your email saying, Peter Hitchens is a Kremlin shill. I am not a Kremlin shill. My interests are entirely in the defence and security of my own country, and I cannot see any purpose whatsoever in this. Then on top of that, the appalling carnage among Ukrainians in Ukraine, and indeed young Russians, being killed or disabled or disfigured for a war which nobody can explain. There is absolutely no rational explanation as to why this war is even taking place at all, and it was incredibly easy for us to have avoided it if we had wished to avoid it. But we did not. In fact, we did many things to help bring it about.
We also heard today that the British Army is currently constrained because we're spending so much time training Ukrainian soldiers as well, Aaron. Now, Peter's obviously not read the media handbook, which says that you have to say at all times that Putin is evil, he has imperialist ambitions and he's going to take over the whole of the Western world. Have you
He
read...
is evil, but he doesn't have imperialist ambitions in my view. And if he does, he can't fulfil them because he can't even capture Kursk, which is about 40 miles from his own border. If he can't capture Kursk, I think the danger of him arriving at Calais is pretty thin.
Do you think more people are waking up to the fact that we're being sold a dud on this particular conflict?
Well, I think what you just said is obviously outlandish. If I was Lithuanian, I'd probably be quite worried. I understand why the Baltic states are worried. I understand why the Poles are worried. You know, this is historically a foe which has torn your country to shreds. But in terms of Britain, there is absolutely no threat or risk. Doesn't mean we shouldn't participate in a broader alliance to make sure that Putin doesn't invade other countries. But in terms of what Peter's saying around national security, there is none at all.
Well, can I just correct myself? I meant to say Kharkov, not Kursk. They are two different places. Kursk has been in the news lately, but it's Kharkov he can't capture. And he can't hold on to a piece of his own country around Kursk, which is...
That's right. I mean, they've had a massive mobilisation of conscripts to basically edge a few inches a day deeper into Ukraine. The idea that it's a threat to Western Europe. By the way, I'm very critical of where we fall short. the European Union and Britain is what, 450 million people, some of the world's largest defence contractors, some of the world's most powerful industrial conglomerates. The idea that where we have a problem is energy. That's the big problem. And 2 years ago, we felt the pinch with regards to energy because Russia turned off the taps of gas into Europe. That is the shortcoming, and that's where we have a major deficit, and it's why we traded that particular commodity with Russia for so long. But on every other index, Europe is superior to Russia, numerically, technologically, the size of their militaries. So
they have more natural resources and more land than they can ever harvest
Precisely.
those resources from. The idea that Putin has imperialist ambitions to take over more land is for the birds.
Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? But it's repeatedly said, and people say, well, he said it in such and such a speech. And I once had a Twitter argument with a very noted liberal left journalist. And I said to him, you keep saying this, but could you please point me to the passage in the speech where he says this? And of course, he couldn't. He said, well, it's on Google, or he didn't know. He'd taken it as read, and then he'd frantically tried to find it and discovered, as everybody does who tries to find it, it's not there. It's not what this is about. I'm not saying that there isn't a purpose for it, but the idea that Russia is trying to reconquer the areas which it lost at the end of the Cold War is fatuous. Some of them might like to, but they know they haven't the capacity.
But even on the eve of invasion of Ukraine, that speech that Putin gave, which was very sort of sentimental, and he's very much into the history of Russia and the motherland, etc. He was very clear about defending the Russian people who live in the Donbass. He was under a lot of pressure from his own people to defend people in that region.
Well, he wasn't defending anybody. He was making an attack.
Attacking them in order to defend them from the bombing that was already happening in that area.
It's a long story, but the truth is that if someone tries to provoke me into a fight, then I think I would be a prize fool if I allowed myself to be provoked. Russia was provoked into that fight. Beyond question, there was provocation. Robert Kagan, one of the principal neoconservative thinkers in Washington, D.C., will tell you that there was provocation. It's not in doubt. It's ridiculous the way people call it unprovoked. But he shouldn't have responded to the provocation, and he should not have invaded Ukraine.
Even with NATO moving closer
with anything,
to the Russian border.
Invading sovereign countries is basically a criminal act. It's also a stupid act, which this country, the United States, foolishly engaged in Iraq 20 years ago. So it's not just them that do it, but whoever does it is doing something both wrong and stupid. And we must be clear to condemn that, because there's no international order if people are just allowed to invade.
The idea that it was unprovoked, though, I think we'd agree on, is it was absolutely
It was provoked,
ludicrous.
but you shouldn't. If I am provoked, I don't respond, and the same should be true of countries.
Do you think, though, that the British voter thought, when they voted for Starmer, that this soon into the Premiership, David Lammy would be giving Ukraine another 600 million quid?
Probably to some extent, because a big part of Starmer's political brand is to say, I'm not Jeremy Corbyn. I am part of the status quo foreign policy establishment, which basically means, as Peter so lucidly said a moment ago, Britain is the fifth wheel in the American car. So that is probably the only part of the Starmer prospectus where he was pretty clear.
But this we keep hearing from Rachel Reeves, we heard it so many times today when she was talking in her unfortunately robotic way about the business strategy, about this £22 billion black hole, £22 billion black hole, where they just found 600 million to give to you.
But it is extraordinary the way money is found for military operations. And
whilst taking it off pensioners this winter.
This is the case. But the advice that the Foreign Office will give to any new government, and gave to the Blair government as well, is always stay as close to the United States as possible. That is the advice incoming governments get. Generally, incoming governments of foreign policy illiterates. They know better, and it seems sensible to them, and they stay as close to them as possible, even if they're doing things which are actually crazy. And it is astounding that in this country we have not developed anything remotely resembling an independent foreign policy which pursues our own national interests.
Is there anybody that can call this out? Is anybody? Will any of the trouble is the only person who ever tried to actually say publicly that maybe there was sort of some nuance that was being lost from this particular conflict was Nigel Farage, and he got roundly criticised in the media for being a Putin apologist. It's just the way to silence people, isn't it, instantly? There's nobody that's ever going to stop this. It feels like a train in motion towards
popular.
World War III.
It's popular. This country has believed for a very long time. It goes back really to the 18th and 19th centuries when we successfully intervened all over the world, particularly on the European continent and in North America, without anything really ever happening domestically. The first time a modern war actually affected this country domestically was the 1939-45 war, and even from that we were far less affected, say, than France or the Low Countries or Italy were. So there's still a feeling that this country can intervene in wars without any great cost to itself, and wars are quite politically popular here until they go seriously wrong. The Iraq War was initially popular. The Blair intervention in Kosovo was popular. The intervention in Libya, which was a catastrophe for the whole of Europe, was popular. And if you oppose these things, as I have done on all those occasions, you find out very rapidly how popular they are and how speaking against them gets you accused of being some sort of traitor.
Our viewers, sorry to interrupt people, our viewers said, Age of Reason says, our troops in Ukraine are training on the job. They are learning as well. And Lady Westminster says, no doubt, no one doubts that Putin is a dictator, but the amount of money and resources we spend on Ukraine is disgraceful. When our own people are suffering, the Ukraine-Russia war is not our war. A lot of you starting to say that, which is very different, I think, from when that initial invasion.
That is interesting that more people are saying that.